The intelligence briefing that changed everything was not delivered in a press conference. It was not leaked to a newspaper. It was not broadcast from a podium in the Pentagon's briefing room. It was delivered underground, inside a mountain in Iran, when a 30,000-pound steel penetrator traveling at supersonic speed reached a depth that Iranian engineers had spent 20 years calculating was physically impossible to reach. That was the briefing, not a warning, not a demonstration, a delivery. And what it delivered was not just structural destruction, it was information. The most consequential kind. The kind that tells every military planner, every intelligence director, and every regime that has ever pointed at a mountain and said, that is safe. That nothing they buried is safe anymore. What I am going to walk you through in the next several minutes is not something you can piece together from headlines. It requires understanding three interlocking systems that most analysts treat as completely separate stories. The first is what Iran built and why they genuinely believed it was untouchable. The second is how the United States found it, not just Fordow. All of it. Every tunnel, every hardened chamber, every dispersal site that Iranian engineers believed was invisible. And the third is what the combination of those two realities now means for every nation on Earth that has staked its security on the doctrine of going underground to survive American power. I have spent years studying targeting doctrine, underground facility defeat, and the intelligence architecture that feeds both. And I want to be direct with you from the start. What has unfolded is not a military operation with political dimensions. It is a political revolution delivered through a military operation. And the full weight of what has changed is still not being correctly reported anywhere. Here's exactly what we are going to cover. First, I am going to take you back to the strategic logic that drove Iran underground in the first place and explain why that logic was completely rational given everything they knew at the time. Second, I am going to explain how the United States found what Iran hid. Not through spies, not through defectors, but through a collection architecture so sophisticated that it can construct a three-dimensional map of a facility's interior from orbit. Third, I am going to walk you through the specific facilities that are now exposed, and what each one tells us about the true scale of Iran's underground program. Fourth, I am going to break down the tools used to neutralize what was found, and why the integration of sensors and strike systems now represents a closed loop that underground construction simply cannot defeat. Fifth, I am going to explain what the Iranian response tells us about how their leadership is processing what just happened. Sixth, I am going to give you my honest assessment of what remains genuinely uncertain, because this story is still developing and I am not going to pretend otherwise. And seventh, I am going to tell you what this exposure means strategically, not just for Iran, but for the entire global doctrine of underground deterrence that nation-states have been building for half a century. Let's begin. To understand what just happened, you have to understand a decision that Iran's military planners made in the early 2000s, a decision that was rational, well-funded, and executed with a precision and patience that Western intelligence agencies came to genuinely respect. When Iran looked at the first Gulf War, what they saw was not an American victory. What they saw was a lesson. The lesson was this: anything on the surface dies. The United States Air Force, deploying precision-guided munitions at a scale and accuracy the world had never witnessed, systematically eliminated Iraq's surface military infrastructure in a matter of weeks. Command nodes, power stations, airfields, artillery concentrations, hardened aircraft shelters that Iraqi engineers built to survive direct hits. Gone. The GBU-28, a 700-pound laser-guided penetrating bomb, punched through meters of reinforced concrete as though the architects had never existed. Iran's military planners, particularly within the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, drew the only logical conclusion. If the Americans can see it and reach it, it will be destroyed. Therefore, nothing of strategic value can be seeable or reachable. The solution was geology, not metaphorically, literally. Iran began burrowing into the Zagros mountain range, the Alborz range, and the limestone formations that run beneath the Iranian plateau, using the rock itself as protection that no weapon in existence could defeat. The strategic logic was elegant in its simplicity. You cannot bomb what you cannot see. You cannot destroy what you cannot penetrate. And even if you can penetrate one thing, you cannot destroy a program that has been dispersed across dozens of locations, some of which you do not even know exist. What emerged over the following 2 decades was not a single facility. It was a doctrine. Iran built the Fordow fuel enrichment plant inside the Kuhe Gazlu mountain near the city of Qom, with centrifuge halls positioned between 80 and 100 meters beneath solid granite, a depth specifically engineered to defeat the most capable bunker-busting weapons in American and Israeli inventories at the time. They expanded the Natanz complex, not just the surface enrichment halls that IAEA inspectors were permitted to access, but a parallel network of deeper shafts and hardened corridors that ran beneath the officially declared footprint and were never fully declared. They constructed facilities near Parchin, the IRGC military research complex southeast of Tehran, that neither the IAEA nor American Overhead Collection could fully characterize for years despite sustained collection efforts. They built redundant command infrastructure for IRGC senior leadership beneath populated areas, specifically to complicate targeting decisions by mixing military and civilian signatures. They dispersed nuclear-relevant equipment, centrifuge components, uranium hexafluoride stocks, and technical documentation across a network of declared and undeclared sites, with the explicit intention that destroying any single node would not destroy the program. The Iranians also did something that almost every Western analysis of their nuclear program consistently underestimates. They studied American targeting doctrine with the same rigor that American planners studied Iranian targets. Iranian military strategists read the same declassified defense studies. They war-gamed the same weapon employment concepts. And they specifically designed their depth specifications, reinforcement geometries, and tunnel configurations to defeat the GBU-28 and its immediate successors, the deepest penetrating conventional weapons in the American inventory as of the early 2000s. At 80 to 100 meters inside granite, they were correct. The GBU-28 reaches approximately 6 meters of reinforced concrete and perhaps 30 meters of dry earth. Against granite at Fordow's operational depth, it was a surface inconvenience, not a structural threat. For roughly 15 years, every honest assessment from within American defense and intelligence circles concluded the same thing. Fordow was not defeatable by available conventional means. The Iranians had built what they set out to build. They had found sanctuary. That was the tactical reality. Now I want to explain why their strategic conclusion, that going underground meant going invisible, was wrong, and why they have known for years that it was wrong, even if they could never publicly acknowledge it. The doctrine of underground sanctuary rests on a single foundational assumption: concealment equals protection. If an adversary cannot map the interior of your facility, they cannot target it with precision. If they cannot target with precision, they cannot destroy it efficiently. This assumption was reasonable in the 1980s. It was questionable by the mid-1990s. By 2010, it was functionally false. And the system that made it false is one of the most impressive and least publicly discussed intelligence architectures in the history of American national security. Begin with what orbits above Iranian territory at any given moment. The National Reconnaissance Office operates a constellation of imaging satellites that includes electro-optical systems capable of resolving objects on the ground to centimeter-level accuracy under favorable lighting and atmospheric conditions. These platforms pass over Iran on regular cycles, and every pass generates another data point on every visible construction signature, every change in surface settlement, every thermal anomaly at tunnel access points. A mountain with a deep complex beneath it does not look like a mountain with nothing beneath it. Geological stress, ventilation heat signatures, ground subsidence patterns, construction material transport, all of these indicators bleed through to the surface in ways that modern collection systems can characterize with precision that would have seemed implausible 2 decades ago. Then there is synthetic aperture radar, SAR. Unlike optical satellites that require daylight and clear atmospheric conditions, SAR operates through weather and darkness, around the clock, every day. It uses radar returns to construct 3-dimensional terrain maps with enough resolution to detect centimeter-level ground subsidence, the almost imperceptible compression of terrain above a tunnel complex as the rock overhead slowly settles into the void beneath it. When Iranian engineers excavated Fordow's centrifuge halls, the mountain above those halls sank by fractions of a millimeter per year. SAR satellites operated by the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency tracked that settlement continuously across years of collection passes, allowing analysts to reconstruct the rough geometry of what existed beneath the surface without a single human source inside the facility. The NGA, whose name appears in essentially no public reporting on Iran's nuclear program, is the organization that translates raw multi-sensor collection into actionable target coordinates and 3-dimensional facility models. Their analysts do not work from photographs. They work from data fusion, electro-optical imagery layered with SAR, seismic monitoring from the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization's global sensor network, measurement and signature intelligence from specialized collection systems, signals intelligence from NSA assets tracking the communications of facility workers and IRGC security personnel, and human intelligence from decades of penetration operations targeting Iranian procurement networks and scientific institutions. The CTBTO's seismic network deserves specific attention here because it is almost universally overlooked in coverage of underground facility defeat. This system was originally designed to detect clandestine nuclear tests by monitoring ground motion globally with extraordinary sensitivity. Those same sensors, when analyzed using modern computational resources and cross-correlated against multi-source intelligence, can detect and characterize the seismic signatures of deep tunnel excavation, controlled demolition for chamber expansion, and even the sustained vibration of large industrial machinery operating at depth. When Iranian engineers bored new tunnels to expand the Fordow complex in the years after its existence was confirmed publicly in 2009, American collection systems were watching the ground settle and listening to the rock fracture along predictable stress lines. They were not watching blindly. They were updating a continuously refined three-dimensional model of the facility that grew more accurate with every collection cycle, every signals intercept, and every overhead pass. Add to this the role of SIGINT at scale. The NSA's collection architecture against Iranian nuclear and military infrastructure is among the most comprehensive targeting intelligence efforts in American history. The communications of every person who enters and exits Fordow, IRGC security guards, nuclear scientists, logistics coordinators, maintenance technicians, construction crews, represent a signals trail that, when analyzed over years of collection, reveals not just that a facility exists, but how it operates, which personnel are critical to its function, where the essential nodes are within its internal architecture, and which specific aim points, if struck with sufficient precision and sequencing, would collapse the system's capability rather than merely create temporary inconvenience. This is targeting intelligence, not just strategic warning. And it is the kind of intelligence that turns a map of a mountain into a precision strike package. This is the critical failure in Iran's underground doctrine. They designed their facilities to defeat the weapons of 2003. They did not design them to defeat the targeting architecture of 2024. And by the time that architecture had matured to the point where it could model the interior of a hardened mountain from space and translate that model into precision weapon aim points, it was too late to reconstruct. Understanding that the United States could find Iran's underground facilities is only half the strategic equation. Finding a target and destroying it are two fundamentally different problems. For roughly a decade, American planners had achieved the first without the second. The intelligence architecture was maturing faster than the strike systems needed to exploit it. Fordow was mapped with increasing accuracy. It was not yet defeatable with confidence. The GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator closed that gap. But what makes the current situation categorically different is not simply the existence of the GBU-57 in the American inventory. It is the integration of the GBU-57 with the targeting architecture I have just described, an integration that creates something the history of conventional warfare has never produced before. When you combine a sensor suite capable of mapping a deeply buried facility to near room-level accuracy with a weapon that can penetrate 60 meters of earth or 8 meters of reinforced concrete and detonate with millisecond precision fusing at the structurally optimal depth, you have closed the loop between intelligence and lethal effect. You have eliminated the operational gap between knowing and destroying. The fuse system on the GBU-57 deserves particular attention because it represents a decade of focused engineering investment to solve a problem that had no previous solution. The fuse must survive the violent deceleration of impact, forces that destroy standard electronics instantly, and then count material layers as the penetrator drives through them, timing detonation precisely enough that the warhead's energy couples into the facility structure rather than dissipating harmlessly into surrounding rock. 2 meters too early means a near miss. At the correct depth, it means structural collapse. Getting that timing right required computational modeling of underground facility construction methods, advanced material science research into penetration physics through layered granite and reinforced concrete, and hardware engineering with no civilian equivalent. The result is a weapon that does not simply reach the depth. It detonates correctly at the depth. The B-2 Spirit remains the only platform on Earth capable of carrying the GBU-57 internally and delivering it through advanced air defense systems without detection sufficient to generate a defensive engagement. A flying wing with a 172-foot wingspan and a radar return roughly equivalent to a large bird. The product of 3 decades of American investment in low observable materials, aerodynamic shaping, and electromagnetic signature management, represents the delivery half of the closed loop. When a B-2 crew releases a GBU-57 against a precise aim point inside a hardened underground facility, they are not executing a strike in the conventional sense. They are executing the terminal phase of an intelligence-to-effect cycle that may have been building for years before that single release event. What unfolded across the operational window of this campaign was not a single strike event against a single facility. It was the execution of a targeting package that had been refined continuously as collection systems updated facility models and rehearsed at full scale against mock-up geometries constructed from NGA's reconstructed facility architecture. B-2 crews launching from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, the only operational home of this aircraft, flew missions exceeding 30 hours in duration. multiple aerial refueling contacts, coordinated with KC-135 and KC-46 tanker aircraft positioned on pre-planned tracks outside Iranian airspace. Penetration profiles designed to exploit the specific engagement geometry limitations of Iran's S-300 PMU, 2 air defense batteries. Russian-supplied systems whose radar frequencies, tracking algorithms, and engagement envelopes have been systematically characterized by American collection assets over years of observation. 2 GBU, 5-7S per B2 sortie. Multiple sorties against multiple aim points. The strike package was not designed to damage Fordow. It was designed to exploit the sequential penetration effect, where successive weapons follow the trajectory already weakened by the first impact, reaching progressively greater effective depths through pre-bored channels, coupling more energy into the facility structure with each subsequent detonation. The physics of this effect were known before the first bomb released. The geometry was pre-planned from facility models. The execution was what years of training existed to accomplish. And what made the full picture significant was not Fordow alone. The same targeting architecture that characterized Fordow had been building models on every facility in Iran's underground network for years. This was not a single-site operation in its intelligence dimension, even if the physical strikes were concentrated on specific aim points. Before I give you the strategic assessment, I want to be honest with you about where genuine uncertainty lives in this story, because I think epistemic clarity serves you far better than false precision. The exact condition of the deepest centrifuge infrastructure inside Fordow is not publicly confirmed. Battle damage assessment on deeply buried facilities is genuinely difficult and takes time to complete with confidence. Overhead collection can identify surface disruption, access tunnel collapse, seismic signatures consistent with subsurface detonations of the expected yield, and thermal anomalies indicating structural compromise at depth. What it cannot determine with confidence in the immediate aftermath is whether centrifuge arrays on the lowest operational levels were physically destroyed, or whether they remain intact but inaccessible behind collapsed tunnel sections above them. American officials have characterized the strikes as achieving their intended effects. That is a deliberately careful formulation, not a definitive declaration of total destruction. There is also a legitimate open question regarding equipment dispersal. Any competent military organization facing a credibly escalating threat environment would begin relocating critical assets to alternate protected sites before conditions reach the threshold where a strike becomes politically executable. The IRGC is a competent military organization with sophisticated logistics capabilities and years of experience moving sensitive equipment under intelligence pressure. Whether Iran successfully dispersed centrifuge arrays, enriched uranium stocks, or critical technical personnel before the operational window is a question that intelligence analysts are actively working to characterize, and the honest answer is that the full picture is not yet available in any public reporting. The information environment surrounding these events has also been exceptionally difficult to navigate. Iranian state media outlets, including Press TV and IRINA, followed a pattern. Initial blanket denial, followed by minimization, followed by selective acknowledgement with disputed framing. That analysts of Iranian information operations will recognize immediately from previous incidents. American officials have maintained notably careful formulations rather than making specific capability claims on the record. Both patterns are consistent with a situation where significant damage occurred, but the full assessment is still being developed. Patience and skepticism toward confident claims from either side is the correct analytical posture until collection systems have had adequate time to build a more complete picture. Now, I want to give you what I believe most coverage of these events has fundamentally missed. And this is the analysis that I think changes how you understand everything that has happened. The conventional framing is that the United States struck and significantly damaged Iran's most hardened nuclear facility. That framing is accurate but critically incomplete. The more strategically significant framing is this. The United States demonstrated publicly, in an operational context with stakes that leave no room for charitable interpretation, that its collection architecture can find, precisely characterize, and deliver lethal conventional effect against underground facilities that the adversary designed specifically to be invisible and invulnerable. Those are 3 distinct demonstrated capabilities, and their combination has no historical precedent in the history of conventional military power. The targeting architecture I described does not stop working when the ordnance detonates. It continues collecting. It continues updating models. Every facility Iran maintains, every tunnel they extend, every new chamber they excavate, every hardened node they add to their underground network, is being tracked by systems they cannot see, cannot effectively jam, and cannot relocate out of range of. This creates a condition that strategists call a persistent surveillance and strike regime. The underground is not safe from observation. And as of this operation, it is no longer safe from destruction by conventional means. That combination has never existed before. The psychological dimension of this is what I believe the geopolitical analysis community is most consistently undervaluing: Iran's entire deterrence posture, their willingness to maintain proxy forces in Lebanon, Iraq, Yemen, and Syria, to threaten freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz, to sustain offensive cyber operations, to advance uranium enrichment toward weapons-grade levels, was built on an implicit structural assumption. The assumption was that even if the Americans eventually decided to act militarily, the core of the nuclear program would survive underground and could be reconstituted. The regime would absorb the surface damage and emerge with its essential strategic capability intact. That assumption is not damaged. It is dismantled. And when a regime's deterrence logic is dismantled at its structural foundation, the resulting disorientation does not produce predictable responses. It produces a period of genuine strategic reassessment that can move in any direction, including directions that were previously ruled out precisely because the underground guarantee made them unnecessary. Khamenei and the IRGC senior leadership know things they will not say in public. They know the approximate scope of what American collection systems can characterize. They know the demonstrated penetration capability of the GBU-57. They know the B-2's operational reach and what Iranian air defenses failed to do against it. They know that the combination of these three realities means that no facility they can build, at any achievable depth, inside any mountain they can find, is now beyond the reach of American conventional power and the intelligence architecture that directs it. That knowledge will shape every decision they make going forward, whether or not it shapes anything they choose to say publicly. And that gap between what they know and what they can acknowledge is itself one of the most strategically consequential facts of this entire episode. Every nation that has invested in underground military infrastructure as a component of its deterrence strategy has been watching these events with the focused attention of an organization whose core planning assumption just failed a live combat test. North Korea maintains an estimated 8,000 to 11,000 hardened underground facilities, including tunnel complexes for long-range artillery, protected command nodes for senior leadership, and presumed storage for nuclear-capable systems. Kim Jong-un's military planners have watched the United States demonstrate that the GBU-57 functions in combat against hardened granite, that the B-2 can penetrate Russian-supplied air defense systems and release weapons unimpeded, that the NGA's collection architecture can map underground facilities built specifically to be undetectable, and that the gap between intelligence and destruction is now effectively closed. The conversation in Pyongyang is not about whether this changes their doctrine. It is about how profoundly it changes it and how urgently a response is required. China's People's Liberation Army rocket force has invested decades of effort in what PLA planners have called the Underground Great Wall, an extensive network of hardened tunnels for nuclear weapon storage, ballistic missile systems, and command infrastructure specifically designed to survive American conventional strikes. Russian strategic command infrastructure includes facilities beneath Moscow engineered to survive near-miss nuclear detonations, and those facilities are now being evaluated against a demonstrated weapon employment capability that has fundamentally changed what survivable means in conventional warfare terms. The signal that traveled from the Kuhe-Gazlu mountain to every underground military complex on Earth was not subtle. Depth is not protection. Depth is delay. And for facilities that have been under continuous collection by NGA, NRO, and NSA assets, even that delay has been progressively eliminated. Here is the bottom line, and I am going to give it to you plainly. What the United States military executed was not a strike against a facility. It was the operational demonstration of a closed intelligence-to-effect loop with no historical precedent in the history of conventional warfare. The NGA's collection architecture mapped Fordow's interior from orbit. The B-2 Spirit delivered the GBU-57 through Iranian air defenses that failed to generate a defensive engagement. The weapon reached depths that Iran spent 20 years calculating, were physically unreachable, and detonated at the structurally correct depth with fused precision that required a decade of engineering investment to achieve. Together, these three things represent a system that has permanently retired the doctrine of underground sanctuary as a viable strategic posture against American conventional power. Iran built its program on the foundational belief that going underground meant going beyond reach. The American intelligence community spent 15 years proving that belief false at the collection level. The United States Air Force spent this operation proving it false at the destruction level. The gap between knowing and destroying is closed. That is not an operational result. That is a strategic transformation delivered entirely through conventional means. And every government on Earth that has been counting on depth as protection woke up to a different world.